Well, good evening. I'm David Loyne. I'm a BBC correspondent. I was once based in South Asia and used to travel to Pakistan. I tried to go to Pakistan last week with Nawaz Sharif, and the embassy, knowing exactly what day he'd be travelling, told me that there would be no problem getting a visa on the following Monday, 10 hours after he'd left Britain with the press who went. And unfortunately, Amir Gowri, who's a Pakistani TV correspondent based in London, was on that flight and has been taken ill with some kind of bizarre Litvinenko-style lurgy, he believes. He's in an isolation ward rather than being with us tonight. But we do have, on my left here, Dr. Farzana Sheikh from Chatham House. And I should remind you, this Frontline event is not on Chatham House rules. It's very much an on-the-record event. It will be recorded for use online on the Frontline Club website. Dr. Sheikh will try and go through some of the extreme labyrinth of legal problems facing Pakistan at the moment, as well as looking at some of the other issues there. Professor Anatol Lieven has travelled in the region, I know, since the 1980s, because he popped up in Rory Peck's diaries when I was writing the book about the Frontline Club. And if you look in the index, he's actually there in the book of Frontline, which is available downstairs, still in the club and indeed in the restaurant.
Well, my main credentials are I was stringer in Pakistan and Afghanistan.
He travels frequently to
I'm
Pakistan.
here by right, not just as a guest.
He's not just a professor at the extremely highly regarded War Studies Department at King's College London, but he's also a genuine journalist, and therefore has a right to be on this platform. As is Moeed Pirzada, who is a Pakistan TV presenter and editor of one of the bigger Pakistan TV channels, ARY, based here in London. It's been one of the extraordinary phenomena of Pakistan in recent years that media, in particular television, has become privatised and really changed the culture of the country. It is 60 years since the stroke of midnight, the midnight hour that divided India and Pakistan has the dismal record as a country of being a country where power has never been handed over from one democratically elected leader to another. It has had democracy and military rule, and neither have been stable. And now it appears to be trying both, a kind of democracy emerging out of a kind of military rule. Hot news that I've just heard, in fact, from Moeed since I've been on this platform, is that Osama bin Laden this afternoon has put out a new video on the internet, the way he's now able to communicate with the world, what defense analysts call a virtual sanctuary. The sanctuary that insurgents used to have, they used to go up into the mountains, now they can just operate on the internet and be able to communicate with their people. Osama bin Laden has this afternoon said that Musharraf is now the enemy of Islamists in Pakistan, so it's kind of game on, since the belief is that Osama bin Laden is somewhere in the Pakistani territory, although not probably in settled Pakistan, in the northwest frontier or somewhere like that. Now, the extreme labyrinth of legal matters means that this evening's talk is called Pakistan Votes, and I think if we took a show of hands of people in this room as to whether there will be any votes in Pakistan before the end of this year, anyone who knows about Pakistan, I think it would be unlikely, but we can talk about that on the platform. I'd like to start with Farzana to talk about this extreme legal thicket. We've got the Supreme Court now flexing its muscles. We've got President Musharraf, was just a military leader, now sort of trying to run for office. What are his problems? Why can't he?
Million-dollar question, isn't it? Well, this... I should really start, I suppose, by looking at the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court that so unexpectedly, it appears, decides to flex its muscles. This, of course, goes back to March, when President Musharraf very unwisely decided summarily to dismiss the Chief Justice Chaudhry, Iftikhar Chaudhry, on grounds that he had misused his power. And this galvanized, in the first place, the legal fraternity in Pakistan, who felt that it was unwarranted interference on the part of the executive in the affairs of the judiciary. But it also acted as a trigger to mobilize immense public disenchantment against President Musharraf and his regime. And since March, really, there's been no let-up in what appears to be an increasingly intense confrontation between the executive on the one hand and the judiciary. In July of this year, Chief Justice Chaudhry was reinstated after he moved the Supreme Court, and that reinstatement has been seen by many to be one of the main causes of General Musharraf's political weakness. What this political weakness brought with it was, of course, a whole series of legal challenges, with a galvanized legal fraternity now prepared to take on the executive, a high-handed executive, one should say. And of course, there was already talk that the legal fraternity, Pakistan's lawyers, were going to take on General Musharraf, who had made it clear that he intended to seek re-election as president while keeping his army uniform on.
Should just interject before we go into the October votes. The Pakistani system was designed to have a strong prime minister.
Yes.
And a weak president. And the constitutional arguments are all around the strengthening of the presidency against the weak prime minister. President Musharraf has taken the presidency and tried to turn it into a strong presidency and is now fighting all of these things that are designed to stop him taking those powers.
That's right, and I did want to actually bring that in when we get down to talking about the deal with Benazir Bhutto, because one of the conditions that she introduced, it is said quite late in the negotiations, was the amendment of a constitutional amendment which concentrated immense powers in the hands of the president, giving him the right to dismiss the prime minister and dissolve the assemblies. And she has pressed General Musharraf to amend this constitution so that the 1973 constitution, which has never really been revoked, should revert back to its parliamentary spirit. In other words, make Parliament supreme. But we can always talk about that later. I think at the moment, the main legal question is the one of President Musharraf seeking re-election as president with his army uniform on, that is to say, while still holding the position of army chief. And this is clearly in violation of the Constitution. Now, for those of you who are a little unfamiliar with the way this whole affair has played itself out, I should say that after being selected, and I use the word advisedly here, in a referendum in 2002, General Musharraf gave his word to the opposition parties that he would shed his uniform by the end of 2004. Opposition parties agreed to that, and it was in exchange for that kind of commitment on his part that they consented to essentially legitimize his 1999 coup. However, in 2004, towards the latter end of 2004, General Musharraf decided, in his wisdom, that actually he didn't wish to give up his army uniform. And at that time, decided that one of the most compelling reasons for him to continue to exercise control was, of course, the deteriorating security situation. So that, just to sort of fast forward very quickly, 2 days ago, when his lawyer made a statement before the Supreme Court, assuring the court that General Musharraf would give up his uniform before taking the oath of office in November, if he was to be re-elected. He would doff his uniform, as they say. Opposition parties simply hooted and said, well, you know, this man is not a man of his word. He said that he would take it off once before, and he never did. And at that time, he cited deteriorating security conditions in Pakistan as one compelling reason for keeping on that uniform. Well, the security situation is much worse now, particularly, of course, in the tribal areas. So the big issue now is whether or not he is going to be able to pull this off. There are, at the moment, about 6 petitions which the Supreme Court is hearing, all of which center on the issue of President Musharraf's re-election. Basically, there are...
Let's go into detail of that in a minute.
Yeah.
One word just now. Do you think there will be a presidential election on October the 6th, as is now slated?
Are you taking bets?
One word?
I probably... You're putting in... I would be sceptical.
Anatole?
2 words? Yes, but.
Go on.
I think if the opposition parties boycott, Musharraf will dissolve the assemblies and go for new elections.
But, you know, the thing is that you can't dissolve the assemblies once the election schedule has been announced, of course, according to the law, and he's done that now. So
this is the argument that's happening in the Supreme Court.
Exactly so, exactly so, and that's why legal...
if I add something to just bring it to the present-day situation, what it is at the moment, I think there is actually, there's no doubt that General Musharraf's position is very precarious, as we have been watching it since March. But in the last 10 days, General Musharraf has, the kind of deal-maker he has become by now, has improved his situation to a great extent by forcibly throwing Nawaz Sharif, the former Prime Minister, in quite audacious disregard for the Supreme Court's judgment. In a way, in a realistic way, he has kind of brought him back into the center of the things. And if we read more carefully the events of the last 10 days, the way the whole discussion on the 3 constitutional petitions has taken shape inside the Supreme Court, and the way the bench has been constituted, and how the Chief Justice of Pakistan has kept himself away from the 9-member bench, it looks that General Musharraf is now striking more or less, more successfully, a deal with the Supreme Court of Pakistan, not only by making that petition, but also if we follow the kind of the arguments that have been carried in the Supreme Court. The first thing which I will cite as an evidence is that the Chief Justice Iftikhar Muhammad Chaudhry has distanced himself from the 9-member bench. The second thing is, when Imran Khan, who made the petition in the Supreme Court, in the 9-member bench, to enlarge it into a full bench in the Supreme Court, a full Supreme Court of Pakistan, to hear these constitutional petitions, as was in the case when the Chief Justice Iftikhar Chaudhry was reinstated, this bench has not agreed. The third thing which the media and the political analysts watch more carefully is that when the Chief Justice constituted the 9-member bench, some of the most strident anti-Musharraf justices and judges, for instance, Khalil Ramde, who was instrumental in enlarging and was a close friend of Etazaz Hassan, the barrister Etazaz Hassan, and some of the other judges are not part of this 9-member bench. And the discussion that has followed inside that bench as well has been, the tone and tenor of the discussion is as if the Supreme Court wants to give him a leeway out. So the feeling I have is, after talking to a lot of constitutional people in Pakistan as of now, is that the Supreme Court decision, which is expected either tomorrow on Friday or on Monday, will make it possible for General Musharraf. It will probably close some of his options, like probably they might demand him that he cannot be fighting the election in uniform, but at the same time would take away the 2-year bar on him, which is the other petition. So the General Musharraf will then be in a situation to fight the election without the uniform. This is my take on it.
Well,
just to complicate the legal situation even further, I was going to mention that there are several other legal issues swimming around. One is the 2-year bar, which has to be lifted. Another, of course, as regards, well, 2 more, as regards Benazir, are the corruption charges, which have to be dropped, and the ban on a 3rd term, which has to be changed. Changing the law, the Constitution in this way is... I mean, none of it is according to some set script with a set of clear answers.
Well, for a country that doesn't operate successfully and hasn't under a rule of law, it's remarkable the way that the lawyers have got involved in the Constitution in this way. I mean, do you agree with Farzana that really does make Musharraf a significantly weaker figure politically?
Yes, but I think the decisions, the decisions of the Supreme Court, the actions of the lawyers are important on a tactical level. But what has been sapping Musharraf's power over the years has not been that. It's been partly his unpopular stance in the war on terror, and partly because every Pakistani government becomes unpopular after a while because it can't give people what they want. It just can't, it doesn't have it. And so there's a sort of underlying rhythm.
Why does it matter so much that he should still remain a general and the president? What's the position of the Pakistani army? Why does this thing matter so much?
Because it is by far the most powerful institution in the country. It is the only effective institution of state by now.
And I'd like to just come in on that. I think that is really the key question. I think General Musharraf is playing this very carefully, because if you read Sharifuddin Mirzada's statement as given to the court, it says that the president is prepared or will take off his uniform, will give up his post as army chief if he is re-elected and before he takes the oath of office. And I think what General Musharraf is trying to say here are two things. One, perhaps, as Moeed is saying, giving the Supreme Court some way in which it might consider a ruling whereby it would consider General Musharraf seeking re-election with his uniform on, but actually not being able to take the oath of office, not being formally appointed as president with his uniform on, which he's agreed to do. But more importantly, I think, and opposition parties have been amongst the first to emphasize this, is that General Musharraf is making it very clear that he still wishes to keep the ultimate weapon in reserve. And the ultimate weapon is that if there should be a negative ruling against him by the Supreme Court, he will simply still have the power to impose emergency rule, if not martial law. And that is really, I mean, that he is not going to brook any opposition. He has decided he wants to be president, and he is going to go for it.
Well, as you say, the opposition parties hooted when he promised that he would do this, and in your words, and the courts are almost certainly not going to accept it. So, Moeed, I mean, what's going to happen over the next month or two, do you think, politically? Well, Musharraf has got to constitutionally leave office, hasn't he?
David, the way things are moving in Pakistan, I'm sorry, month is too long. Things will happen in days, you know. Tomorrow probably the Supreme Court decision will come, or on Monday. So it will once again, the whole field will change in Pakistan. I think I'll agree with Farzana that Musharraf's situation is very weak regarding that. But I will also agree with Anatol that one of the principal reasons for Musharraf's position to weak is, imagine he is there almost 8 years. Starting from 12th of October 1999, President Bush has been elected twice, 8 years. President Clinton was very, very popular, had to leave after 8 years. He's there without any justifiable legal mechanism for 8 long years. So one of the principal reasons is the anti-incumbency feeling of the Pakistani society. But the unpopularity of the Musharraf is not necessarily matched by the popularity of the political forces.
Yeah.
That is the other problem, which we have clearly seen, and I think they have not allowed you to go to Islamabad. What happened on 10 September is that despite all the promise of the PMLN and the Poonam and the ADM of garnering the Pakistani masses, I mean, there was hardly any response, which is actually being discussed inside the political formations. So I see Musharraf there, unfortunately, whether we like it or not. I see Musharraf there. I see him under the circumstances probably getting himself elected as well, and coming to the answer that why he wants to keep the hold in the army is, he is now clear that the hold in the army will enable him to garner the vote from the electoral college of the president, for which he has to get about 700 votes or 600 something.
Well, let's talk about the other political parties. I mean, you mentioned, you know, Nawaz Sharif and Benazir Bhutto, the two figures who dominated Pakistani politics when there's been a democracy, and Benazir Bhutto's father, of course, was hanged by the former Pakistani military dictator, General Zia. I might just say in passing, you talk about the visa problems. Pakistan has become an extremely difficult country to get into and to travel around in as a journalist. There was a very prominent woman journalist beaten up badly in Quetta by Pakistani authorities when she travelled there on the wrong kind of visa. If, as a journalist, you go to Pakistan, you just get a Karachi only or an Islamabad only visa. And that is, I think, weakening international understanding of the country. And I see it as a significant mistake on the part of the authorities there. But of course, it's more difficult for leaders of constituted political parties to go back there. The leader of the MQM is based out in Harrow, and as we've seen Benazir Bhutto and Nawaz Sharif spar either at the Dorchester or the Hilton in London as they hold their press conferences. None of this is these big political parties, big political forces in Pakistan are actually based in Pakistan. I mean, if Nawaz were to be able to stand tomorrow in a free election against Benazir, who would win?
Well, I think it has been said by those who follow Pakistani affairs closely, and I would include myself in this. I think if tomorrow there were to be free and fair elections in Pakistan, I think it is very, very likely that Benazir would probably scrape in as the largest party, with possibly Nawaz Sharif coming a close second, the Islamist parties with a larger share of the vote than they have historically been able to command, but nevertheless, as you know, parties with an appreciable showing.
But he could do a deal with the Islamist parties and she couldn't. And isn't she weakened by her attempts to do a deal with Musharraf, who, as we've heard, is increasingly not seen as a creditable future for the country?
Historically, I think, again, we have very short memories. I mean, one has to remember that although we like to see Benazir very much as the model of the secular politician, and for the most part she probably is, everything is relative. Remember that particularly during her second administration, she had a very close relationship, very close alliance with the JUI, led by Maulana Fazlur Rahman. It was indeed under Benazir's second administration that the Taliban, with the blessing of her Interior Minister, General Nasirullah Babur, took power in Afghanistan. So while I would agree that Nawaz Sharif's links with the religious right have been much closer, after all, he does have a past which goes back to Zia. He was seen very much as the protege of Zia and that kind of sort of neo-Islamist establishment. Benazir too has been known to make deals with the JUI, and there is no reason why she wouldn't want to do the same again. I mean, she is in it, and if there's one thing that is constant about Pakistani politics, it is precisely the phenomenon of shifting alignments. There is no such thing as ideological politics in Pakistan. It is, to put it very crudely, Lota politics.
Well,
and
in
for
terms
those of you who know what this term means...
Do you want to explain to those who don't know what Lota politics, what a Lota is?
I will leave that to...
What's a Lota, and why is it...
Well, Lota has to be explained because Lota is the small utensil which we keep in the bathrooms and the toilets, you know, as an attempt
to take out to a field for certain purposes.
Yeah, but that's not the why it's called Lota politics. There is actually a reason for that.
There is a reason.
The Lota, the utensil, is also used in certain kind of traditions that you offer prayers and it moves, you know. So it moves you when you have certain.
It goes both ways.
Yeah.
It also.
That's the bottom line.
It can change its direction. It can change its direction
because they put money in it. Because don't you take it around and they put
Yeah.
money in it? That's what.
So it can.
The
If
donors.
I could give it
Anyway, sorry.
perhaps
More seriously.
a slightly more respectable name, it's about patronage. But it's not just about patronage because great families, shift from side to side depending on the patronage and the jobs that go to them. It's because right down, to the village level, people need jobs, people need protection from the police, people need protection from the courts, by the way. I mean, it's one reason why I find, the lawyers presenting themselves as, great agents of democracy, a trifle ironic, given, what happens to any poor person who goes before a Pakistani court or a Pakistani lawyer. You need protection in Pakistan. You need help. A politician is there to provide you with that protection, with that help, with jobs. And so, of course, at one level you have electoral politics. At another, you have people continually angling for position. And so it shifts from side to side and side to side, depending on what the government can give. The problem is that the government can never give enough. There isn't enough to give. And so after a while, it shifts to another side. But that government then runs out of jobs and contracts as well.
So it's a kind of feudalism. It's never been a democracy.
Well, what was England in the 18th century?
Right. And the two big political parties, and we would have Benazir probably just scrape it, more of a populist politician, more of the, she can offer more of the sort of bread and shelter rhetoric of her father. She would still need the support of, Fazana talked about neo-Islamist parties, but now there are real Islamist parties in Pakistan. She would still, if she were to come in, need the support of the northwest frontier, and that's where Islamism is now stronger than anywhere and stronger than ever.
Well, it depends, you know, on the arithmetic of Parliament in the end, after the elections. I mean, one thing to be absolutely clear, as Fazana said, nobody is going to win an absolute majority. The PPP will undoubtedly, I think, emerge as the largest party. But I don't know anyone who, I mean, outside the PPP, who thinks they get more than 30%. So they've got to have allies. Where will they get those allies from? Very difficult by now from the Islamist parties. Possible. I mean, I talked to a leading, not just JUI, but I talked to a leading Jamaat politician. I asked whether they could do a deal with the PPP. He said, sure, we've done it before. Which
Can you just define the difference between the JUI and the Jamaat?
Well, the JUI is basically...
on the Islamic right.
No, the JUI is basically Pashtun and political opportunist. The Jamaat has, of course, Pashtun elements, but he's more Mahajir.
Which one would Osama vote for?
Jamaat.
But
I missed your comment. Which will do more with Osama? This is what your question is?
Jamaat is closer to Al-Qaeda, JUI is closer to the Taliban, insofar as it makes a difference.
Well, I would actually say that when we use the word Islamist, it actually becomes slightly confusing to understand the Pakistani religious politics, because Pakistan's mainstream religious parties, which exist for the last 40 or 50 years or so, like Jamaat-e-Islami and Jamiyat-ul-Islam, JUI, Fazlur Rahman, which has been an ally of Benazir Bhutto previously, they are more or less political forces, ultra-conservative, religious. Their politics is religion, but they're not Islamist as such. They are just like as corrupt, prone to all kind of political deals, which all of the political parties make. The real Islamists are the other kind of forces that are now emerging in the last 10 years, and they are not necessarily represented in Pakistani politics in terms of political formations. The forces that are fighting General Musharraf, the forces that are mushrooming this kind of insurgency and all that, are not necessarily represented in the form of political formations. So Jamiyat-ul-Islam of Fazlur Rahman has sympathies, but the sympathies are basically based on the ethnicity basis, Pashtun element basis. And Jamaat-e-Islami...
So it's the same tribal, feudal links that keep the parties going?
Yes, you can actually say, because ethnicity, the tribal links are more important. So, for instance, when the Lal Masjid events, which is one of the subjects we should actually have touched in Islamabad, the Red Mosque events, the Jamiyat-ul-Islam, the people who were holed inside the mosque, the Maulana Ghazi and all of that, were actually more or less extensions of JUI. But the JUI actually distanced itself. When at the height of the crisis, they were expecting help, and they were asking JUI to even negotiate between them and the Musharraf government. But JUI, looking at the mood in the rest of the country, the unpopularity of the whole Red Mosque thing, clearly distanced itself and were making statements against them. So the Pakistani political parties are not Islamist as such, religious parties.
So just to comment about the Jamaat, I'm not quite so sure of that with regard to the Jamaat. If you look at what the reaction of the Jamaat to the Lal Masjid, it was very different. And it may be true of the Jamaat's leadership, who've been around for, I mean,
Lal Masjid is Red Mosque.
Red Mosque. But it's interesting, if you look at the Jamaat base, the leadership has problems with the base now, and that was reflected in their sort of zigzagging over
What
the
do you
Red Mosque.
exactly mean that they have the problems with the base? One issue...
Parts of the base are much more radical. Remember, I mean, a lot of Al-Qaeda people have been picked up, you know, being sheltered by members of the Jamaat. Not by the leaders of the Jamaat, but by, you know, local members and even local leaders of the Jamaat.
Yes.
So the Jamaat, I think, is a much more coherent ideological, or at least, I mean, it's not as purely opportunist and
that's true.
as the JUI.
Yes, I just wanted to add a further dimension to this by emphasizing the nuance, the sort of the nuance we need in understanding Islamist parties and Islamism, and really one major dividing line between parties like the JUI and the JI, in other words, the Jamiyat-ul Islam and the Jamaat-e-Islami, is of course the JUI, apart from the ethnic dimension, are of course the ulama parties. Ulama parties deeply linked to the whole tradition of theological learning, in this case of Deoband, a school a theological school based in this small provincial town in northern India, which had enormous influence in 19th century India, but then subsequently spread its influences beyond India. So
they're the natural supporters of the Taliban.
They are the natural supporters, seen very much...
Because the Taliban grew out of that same route.
Seen very much as the mentor of the Taliban. They are what one would call the ulama parties, as opposed to the JI, which are much more akin to what might be called, akin to the Muslim Brotherhood. They are essentially lay activists, lay Islamists. So there is a dividing line there, which is reflected and manifested in quite different ideological positions. Added to this, of course, we must talk about the JUP, the Jamiat ul-Ulama Pakistan, which represents the dominant tradition, which is the Barelvi tradition. Oh, no, but the reason why I say this is only to make a point that the Islamists themselves are deeply divided. Not so much ideologically, but theologically, their positions really are poles apart. So when one talks about an Islamist threat, my own view is that it tends to overlook the very serious divisions within an alliance like the MMA.
But I'm struck going to, for example, the Northwest Frontier, as and when I'm allowed to go in or I sneak in, talking to friends there who are not in poor places, living in rich parts of Peshawar, in officers' quarters, how they say that in the mosque on a Friday there's a collection for the Taliban, as there was for the IRA in New York in the 1970s, and how widespread it is and acceptable it is for the Taliban right across the Northwest Frontier. Now, I mean, just going further on into that sort of general support, there's a lot of personal support. You say Jamaat members, leaders have given shelter to Taliban people when they've come across the border, Al-Qaeda people when they've been found coming across the border, and you would see a distinction between the Taliban and Al-Qaeda, foreign fighters to some extent, with the Al-Qaeda people. But we do know also that the Taliban was financed by ISI, the Pakistani intelligence services, right at the beginning, and up to an extent there's a large part of the Pakistani armed forces who would still quite like to see the Taliban in some kind of influence or power within Afghanistan. So how deep these roots and these general things we're talking about, Islamism on a party political basis and on a personal basis, how deep does that go into the Pakistani political and military establishment? Very deep, I would suggest. And for this, I would turn your attention, one, to a statement by Bushaid Hussain, Secretary General of General Musharraf's ruling party, who last week suggested that in any new political dispensation in Pakistan following elections, the JUI should be given a key role. And his statement, of course, came in the wake of a commentary by Ahmed Rashid on the BBC website, in which Ahmed asserted, without much evidence, I should say, that actually there were sections within the senior echelons of the military and the intelligence agency who have pressed for Maulana Fazlur Rahman, the leader of the JUI, to be named an interim prime minister to oversee a process of free and fair elections, and that they will brook no opposition, and that they want a role reserved for the JUI. And I think that's quite significant. Should we be worried that the Taliban and Al-Qaeda have deep roots within the Pakistani military establishment, given that America and Britain see General Musharraf as a bulwark in the so-called Bush-named war on terror, which the British government no longer uses as a title for it?
Well, I'm half Irish. And I remember when I was a kid asking my mother, whose name was Monaghan, about support for the IRA in Ireland and in Northern Ireland. And I said, but, you know, we travel in Ireland all the time. I mean, we've even been to Northern Ireland. I mean, surely the vast majority of people there, they don't support the IRA, they don't support IRA activities. And she said to me, you don't understand. It's not a question of actively supporting you know, what these people do. It's if somebody comes to your door at 11 o'clock at night and he says, they're after me, shelter me. Will you shelter them or will you not? The thing is that, I mean, there are three layers to this. There's the active support for the creation of the Taliban. There is the deep unhappiness I found in Peshawar in May, virtually universal unhappiness in Pashtun society with the American war in Afghanistan and America's role there. And a sort of Irish-style emotional support or toleration of the Taliban as people are fighting against that, to the degree that people, including whiskey-drinking secularists, would find it bloody hard to hand over somebody, a Taliban figure who actually came to their door, to the Americans. They might hand them over to the Pakistani police, but not to the Americans. And the third level is the strategic calculation, which is partly about keeping allies who you might be able to put back in Afghanistan, but is also about the fact that everybody is worried that eventually the Americans will go away again, and what are you going to do with the aftermath? I mean, I talked to Pakistani officials who said, the Pashtuns will last you out. I mean, they lasted you, i.e. you, the British, out before. I mean, the Europeans will be out of there in 4 years. No, ultimately in 4 years' time. The Americans won't last, forever. We are going to have to deal with the aftermath of that.
Well, the British ambassador to Kabul said recently the British would be there for 30 years.
The British ambassador to Kabul is not administering a district in Afghanistan, in the Northwest Frontier province. He's sitting in a comfortable house in Islamabad.
Sitting in Kabul.
Oh, in Kabul, well, yeah, but I mean, the point is, he's not there on the ground. Maybe, whether the British public will tolerate that, I don't know. But the thing is, the fourth thing is, and the most important of all as far as the Pakistani army is concerned, they don't want to fight a civil war in the Pashtun areas. Partly because, I mean, what we haven't mentioned so far is what happened about the surrender of those 250 Pakistani soldiers.
Let's come on to that in a minute. If push came to shove, talking about these deep roots and which way would the Pakistani army go? If somebody were to emerge from a Red Mosque style incident, a genuine Islamist coup d'etat at the heart of Punjab, which way would the Pakistani army go?
I think, with respect, it wouldn't happen that way.
Is there a scenario you could...
Yeah, I'll give you two scenarios.
...move towards in which there was an Islamist takeover and you had somebody closely connected to the Taliban or Al-Qaeda with their finger on the Islamic bomb, which is I suppose, the sort of Daily Mail fear.
Yeah, but I think the two ways in which this would happen, and please disagree with me if you will, it doesn't happen in a vacuum. It happens as a result of two things. One is, which is beginning in a small way to happen already, whether as a result of Islamist attacks on it or as a result of American pressure or a mixture of both, the Pakistani government and army decide to try to launch a really heavy crackdown in Fatah, and bits of the army start to surrender, not act, sit on their guns, and then this spreads through the army. But then I think that will be contained, because at that point the High Command backs off.
What's the other scenario? The
other scenario is that the Americans launch direct attacks into Fatah at some point.
Fatah is the tribal areas, the unsettled by the British right through the 18th and 19th century. And the areas where there's a huge Pashtun majority, and the Pashtun tribe were divided by this artificial border, the Durand Line, for those who don't know all of the history between what was then British India and Afghanistan. All the details are in my next book, actually, which is history, a brief plug, but it's not out yet. But you mentioned in passing this very peculiar incident recently when two companies, effectively, of Pakistani soldiers were taken by Islamist fighters and handed over their weapons without a struggle.
Yeah.
What was that about?
They didn't want to fight. I mean, we've had smaller incidents of that before. But if I could just sketch out my second scenario, which I find, if you're looking at really apocalyptic scenarios, much more plausible. It's if the Taliban launch some really devastating attack in Afghanistan, and then some of them at least do obviously retire into Pakistan, and the Americans come after them in a big way. The scenario that was sketched out for me by a former army officer in Pakistan is that then you get not very junior, but middle-ranking officers up to lieutenant colonel going to their generals and saying, General, we can do this two ways. I can leave the army with my men, and you can allow me to do that, and our guns, and we go to fight the Americans. And then we won't fight as units, we'll be volunteers. Or you can refuse that, and then we go as Pakistani soldiers.
Yeah.
But either way, we fight. Either way, we fight the Americans.
I would like to add to this discussion. This fear of the Islamists taking over the Pakistani establishment, the Pakistani country, either through a popular meme or through a military coup, it fascinates the Western press a lot. I have worked in NWFP as a civil servant before joining the media, and I am from Pakistan. I've lived in all those areas. There is absolutely no possibility. I can assure you. There's absolutely no possibility. It fascinates. It's definitely a very fascinating.
You would have sat here in the Frontline Club in 1978 and said of Iran.
What? No, different.
It's totally different. Sorry, I don't know. But it's a totally different situation. You see, I will come to that. I'll come to that fear that in what circumstances Islamists can actually become more powerful in Pakistan. Right? For instance, just take one example. Imagine the scenario and the perception in Pakistan regarding the forced abduction, overthrow of the former Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif and whatever deal he had struck from Islamabad to Saudi Arabia. Now, the perception in Pakistan is that the Saudis didn't want to get into this mess for various reasons, and they don't like this kind of high-profile role. And Washington was very worried that Nawaz, just landing there as a political opportunist, is throwing an effective spanner because he has popularity in Punjab, right? And he saw this opportunity. He was not very strong before the Supreme Court decisions, and he saw this opportunity. And Washington was working very hard for the last 20 months behind the scenes to strike an effective deal between Benazir Bhutto and General Musharraf, right? And Nawaz was actually going straight, throwing a spanner in the teeth. So what forced the Saudis, the way Prince Mukran came to Pakistan and the Saudi ambassador to United Kingdom also spoke very vocally against the Nawaz issue, was that the Washington was pressurizing the Saudis, persuading the Saudis to accept him back. This is what we have the inside. The Pakistani media is convinced on that thing. Now, these kind of events, when it's seen inside Pakistan, increase the anti-American feeling or the feeling against the West, because they see that the West or the United States is trying to micromanage the Pakistani politics or Pakistani affairs for its own objectives of the war against terrorism. If these kind of things keep on happening, the popularity of the religious parties can continue to increase. They had 61 seats in the last election.
So why are we wrong to be concerned about the threat of an Islamist takeover?
Because at the moment, you see, it's a very far-fetched thing. Unless these things keep on happening. But Washington is also very careful. So immediately when they realize, if you see the dichotomy between the statements that first emerged when the spokesperson was asked in Washington, immediately hours on 10 September, as to reaction, they said it's the internal matter of the Pakistani government. But then the embassy, the Washington, the American embassy in Islamabad, far more alive to the Pakistani sentiments, came up with a totally different statement. They said they should have respected the Supreme Court decision. And then the State Department in the next few hours also revised the position and started criticizing, and a little bit, mumbo-jumbo, the Musharraf should have taken or done different.
I'm going to throw it open to questions in a moment, but Farzana, just on this, Islamist takeover, do you think it's a runner? Do you agree with either of these potential scenarios, or are there others?
Well, I certainly don't. We were talking about this earlier on, and I would certainly put myself amongst those who don't see an Islamist takeover as in any way imminent or something that we can expect in the short to medium term. However, what I would like to say is that, and here I would sort of want to add to what Moeed is saying, not so much that Islamist parties have fed off the uncertainty and the political turmoil. They do that. But one of the reasons why the Islamist parties have gained the kind of influence that I believe they have is because, of course, of an increasingly symbiotic relationship with the ruling military establishment in Pakistan. We now hear talk about a mullah military nexus, and this is not entirely fabricated. The jihadi groups, which have close links to Islamist parties, have served the interests of Pakistan's military establishment. They have been crucial and instrumental to the promotion of Pakistan's regional policies, not only in Afghanistan, but also in Kashmir. And to that extent, it is true, to use a very cliched term, they have become the Frankenstein that the military thought it could control and perhaps no longer can. I think the extremist challenge is real. Whether or not the threat is imminent is altogether a different question. That's my own response.
Questions from the floor. If you would wait for a microphone, which is, does anybody, there's not a hand in the room. One here. Would you tell us your name and who you are, if you are anybody other than just having a name? If you know what I mean.
I'm James Clark. My question is...
You're not representing an organisation.
How much can Musharraf now depend on the army for support?
Well, that's half answered by the last question, but I mean, I still don't think we've quite got the answer to it. From
To whom are you asking this question?
well,
Yeah.
it's to the panel, whoever.
Well,
I mean, I'll begin and we can move leftwards. I mean, it seems to me that the army has, the High Command has always changed sides when it sees the prospect of Pakistani soldiers having to open fire on really large numbers of Pakistani civilians. Above all, in northern Punjab, which is where most of the army is recruited from, but to a somewhat lesser extent in the northwest frontier province as well, because that also has a disproportionate share of the army. And I mean, what the generals are afraid of is precisely the kind of thing that we are beginning to see, you know, which is soldiers refusing to fight, refusing to open fire. But let's be clear, this is a very different matter, to return to the previous discussion, from a military Islamist revolution. This is a delegation of senior generals, corps commanders, going to Musharraf at a certain point and saying, General Saab, we respect you enormously, you know, you've been true to the army, you've been a great president, but for the good of the army, we believe it is time for you to go. And I think Musharraf, as an army man, would go at that point.
I fully agree.
It is the only functioning institution in the country.
Yeah,
what do you think, Mo?
Is the fully functioning institution
well, just
or the
about
scenario?
this question.
I will fully agree with Anatole on this, that the only way the army would communicate to Musharraf that he is not desirable or cannot continue is a corps commander's meeting with him behind the scenes, telling him very politely, sir, it's over, the game is over, you're extremely unpopular, it's risking army's institutional position, our privileges, we can't face the people, there is uprising in Punjab streets or in the northern Pakistan, and Musharraf will have to leave. And they might be thinking of this kind of situation. For instance, if the Supreme Court gives a very strong verdict against him, the army will tell Musharraf that the game is becoming difficult. But the possibility of a coup against Musharraf with an alliance with the Islamists is out of question.
Absolutely.
It's a pretty gloomy set of power brokers, you know, the mullahs and the military. I mean, is there anything else? I mean, we've heard about the private TV channels where, you know, women without veils present the news. What a shock! And you know, and they do, and there's some really, really good journalists in private TV doing some extraordinary investigative stuff. And as you mentioned before, you know, the whole Supreme Court thing wouldn't have happened without that. I mean, in the cities, there are millions of Pakistani youth who don't want necessarily a mullah military nexus.
No, and indeed, and I think you've put your finger on it. And
who's going to mobilise it? Is there a civil society that can speak for them?
An increasingly vocal civil society, which has had huge obstacles to surmount. But I think the point that I would like to make is really that what most Western capitals, Western governments, the Western media need to appreciate about Pakistan, and I cannot belabor this point enough, is that everything in Pakistan is contested. The battle is by no means lost. And sometimes when I read the Western press, I ask myself, well, you know, am I reading something which suggests that, well, all is lost? In Pakistan, actually, people live it very differently. It's really a daily battle, and I'm sure you would agree. And this idea that there are unveiled women, that there are women included who enjoy their drink, is a real phenomenon, and something that, you know, we've learned to live with, coexist with. Of course, you know, there is diversity, there is challenge to all of this, but the battle is on, and it's all up for grabs. And that's really what's so dangerous, because the whole political situation is so fluid, so precarious, that how this battle plays itself out is going to be decisive, not just for Pakistan, but indeed for the rest of the international community. And we know that.
At the back. Unveiled woman.
Unveiled woman?
In front of you.
Good choice.
My name is Victoria Scafield, not representing anybody. I just want to go on actually to the position of Musharraf and his standing in the army. And why has he been allowed to stay so long when clearly he's past his sell-by date? As you said, really, 8 years is presidential term,
too much,
etc. Why is the army, why the corps commanders, why are they being so generous to him in allowing him to stay for so long, and why haven't they had this private chat saying time?
And part of the answer is his history. The Kargil War was popular, although not a victory for the Pakistani army, and getting rid of Musharraf, getting rid of Nawaz Sharif in the way that he did was seen to be a bold move, and bringing in American money. Do you think that's all gone?
I think that's evaporated.
Anatol.
Anyway.
Well, one is America. We haven't really mentioned America yet, but there's a very important political party in Pakistan called America. And the Bush administration has really attached itself to Musharraf in recent years, and has given, let's remember, at the very least $10 billion, most of it to the Pakistani army, to keep Musharraf there, because Musharraf has mostly, I would say pretty much to the limit of his ability, although now there's a great deal of criticism of this line in America, done what America wants. So that's one thing. I mean, America wants him there. America has given a great deal of money to keep him there. But secondly, who is there to throw him out? I mean, Benazir? I mean, not just... Oh, within the army. But the army does... I mean, this is the saving grace of the Pakistani army. It isn't Ghana. Or Sierra Leone.
I will
There is a hierarchy.
The two quick ways. One is this question has been raised by many people inside Pakistan, why the army didn't give him a shut-up call when his retirement at age 60 was passed on December 31st of 2001 or something. And the reason is, one, the chief is very powerful. The Pakistani army draws its inspiration from the British model. It's a strict hierarchical army. It's not like the African armies or Middle Eastern army or the Libyan model, in which the junior ranks can actually say something to the senior ranks in that robust fashion. The second thing is, as Dr. Aisha Sadiqa points out in the book, is the military business model, in which the Pakistani army, at all rank and file, has benefited tremendously by the economic expansion. It's an army that's doing business like the Turkish army. That's the other reason. And the third is a very interesting explanation that has been actually given in the Supreme Court in recent discussions. This question has been part of the Imran Khan's petition, and they said that this guy has actually retired. He reached 60 years of age. Ask him to leave. This is a violation of the Army Act of Pakistan. You reach 60 years of age. And one of the justices actually clarified on that, Supreme Court justices, which was very surprising. He said that the position of the Chief of the Army Staff is actually a constitutional position, so the Chief doesn't retire at the age 60 and is not bound by the Army regulations. So these are the various ways of looking at this position.
You can call things different things. Right up down here at the front, please.
Thank you. My name is Mohammed Sulaib Sheikh. I don't represent anyone. Actually, one of my comments or questions has already been answered by a friend here. That was, I was going to ask you, discussing various power brokers, various parties in Pakistan politics, which you are missing the most important one, that is the West Road, the Americans. That has been said. You were talking about, you said it's an irony that the lawyers community has come up and fought for justice and the rest of it. There is another irony, that is that the West always keeps beating the drums of democracy. But I would remind you that since Pakistan's creation, no American president has visited Pakistan when there was a democratically elected leader there. They've always always done that. Now, regarding Islamic parties, I don't know how true it is, but it's very well believed that the West keeps both secular and religious parties supported so that neither can have overall power. Jamaat-e-Islami leader Maulana Maududi, yes, he was very much disliked by the West because he was a very religious person and he had a religious party. But he was supported too, knowingly or unknowingly, in this way, that his publications were bought by the US and dumped into the sea. Need I say more?
Well, so you see the US as playing both sides.
That's right.
And therefore, potentially, if there is an Islamist takeover,
they won't allow it to happen.
To some extent responsible for it. Well, I wonder
they want to see Pakistan.
I wonder if they'll be able
not
to
a
stop it,
stable
as they
country.
did in Tehran in 1979.
Yeah.
Is anyone...
I think that was during the Cold War. I don't think the Americans are playing both sides now.
There's one scenario which David wants to point out. I think there is one scenario, David, you know, the scenario in which the Islamists can become far more powerful than they are at the moment is the kind of scenario that was being discussed that if Nawaz Sharif party, if Nawaz Sharif is in Pakistani politics, doesn't get any favorable dialogue with the Americans, if the West doesn't talk to Nawaz Sharif, who has sizable standing in Punjab, in Lahore. He's still very popular, you know, because of his rule. If Nawaz Sharif joins and aligns with Imran Khan, with Jamaat-e-Islami and with some other ethnic parties like Poonam, then this ultra-orthodox toward the right, not exactly Islamist, but far more ultra-right religious alliance will suddenly become far more powerful in Pakistani elections. That is one possibility.
Especially if
I'd just like to come in on that and actually say that the fact that the United States has taken such a keen interest in Pakistan's domestic affairs and has made no bones and no secret of its preference for Benazir Bhutto has actually turned out to be a kiss of death for her. I mean, it's given the climate, the prevailing climate in Pakistan, it has really it threatens to erode her credibility in a way that I think would be unfortunate and inadvertent. And Nawaz Sharif, you know, will be amongst those, as we were saying, who will capitalize on this, because of course he has a ready-made platform, a ready-made manifesto there to campaign on an anti-American program, which is going to prove to be hugely popular.
Well, I found that in Peshawar in May. The perception that Benazir was constantly trying to get American support was very damaging to the PPP in Peshawar. But I think that's a very important point, and particularly if, of course, Musharraf's present parliamentary PML, whatever it is, crumbles as a result of him doing a deal with Benazir. A lot of those people are going to be deprived of jobs and contracts as a result, go over to Nawaz. Then you begin to see, I mean, it's a very fragile and vociferous, you know, alliance of notables. But if they're looking as they have to create a parliamentary majority, they have nowhere to go but the Islamists. But also, we must come back to the fact, remember which Islamists. I mean, the JUI is not a revolutionary force. Let's be very clear about this. I mean, the MMA has not carried out a revolution in Baluchistan or the NWFP. You know, this is not Tehran in 1978. So I really think we have to, you know, cool it on that score.
There's one just here, the man with the check shirt. Yeah.
I'm not representing anyone. You mentioned that Benazir Bhutto would probably scrape the elections, but given all that you've said about the military structural dominance and how religious parties are so dominant in society, is the PPP becoming increasingly irrelevant? I mean, what kind of options does she have when she comes to Pakistan next month?
Well, it's not irrelevant, is it? Because it's still the biggest party.
Will she be allowed to land, or will she be arrested for corruption?
Well, that depends on the deal she's done with Musharraf.
No. This is not the right reading. Benazir will benefit tremendously if she's arrested. I mean, she's politically in decline.
Yes.
I mean, because of the news of the deal, and Musharraf and Nawaz, I know for sure. I was, you know, had this inside information, the inside feeling in the Nawaz group 3, 4, 5 months ago, before the Supreme Court thing was. that they were not even expecting to win more than 20 seats in Pakistani elections. They were so worried about their things. And then this whole drama in the last couple of weeks really gave political stock to Nawaz. At the same time, Benazir is losing political stock. And Benazir's problem is this, that Benazir has because Benazir's real ambition and objective is to become the Prime Minister for the third time. And she has two major problems. One, that she needs a constitutional amendment to enable her to become the Prime Minister for the third time. Second, there are some very blistering corruption cases against her. The Spanish case of recently, the Swiss case, the cases inside the National Accountability Bureau, NAB. And she needs Musharraf's help. So as much as Musharraf needs Benazir Bhutto, Benazir also needs Musharraf. So much of the anti-Musharraf rhetoric, which he carefully throws from Dubai, is actually to maintain some sort of political profile.
As I understood the question, it's almost, does the PPP depend on her? Or does it have its own political support? How much support would it actually? Yeah.
Now, People's Party would need Musharraf. People's Party would be in lots of difficult waters without General Musharraf in this election. They would not be able to. They are banking on Musharraf's support. They do say free and open elections, but they need Musharraf's help, in establishment's help in coming back. They got 28% vote, which was the last time. And the PMLQ also got 28% vote in 2002 elections. It was a decimal point difference between them. Their hope is this, the PMLQ will melt down, right? Once the election take place. But if the PMLQ melts down, it is Nawaz that will benefit from the meltdown of PMLQ, not necessarily the People's Party.
But can I just say that one other scenario we need to consider here, of course, is the possibility of a split within the Pakistan People's Party. There is immense disenchantment within the party over the so-called deal, negotiations between Benazir Bhutto and President Musharraf. After all, the Pakistan People's Party is a party that pitched its claim on the fact that it doesn't do deals with military dictators. And waiting in the wings, I understand, is a so-called forward bloc led by Etzaz Ahsan, a highly respected, highly esteemed member of the Pakistan People's Party. He has not been involved in these negotiations with the government team, and there is a fear that he may strike out on his own, in which case, of course, we would see yet another spanner in the works.
When you say fear, it may be a democratic opportunity.
Indeed, that is not to be discounted.
At the front. People do have organisations. I mean, Victoria wrote a perfectly good book about the frontier, for example, and there are people here who I'm sure do you represent an organisation? Do you, or are you just a name?
No.
Go on.
I don't represent anybody
Advertise
either.
yourself.
My name is Tasveer Gari and I'm not representing anyone. I got a couple of questions for Mr. Pizza, maybe. What exactly I'm confused about at the moment is what would be, do you think, how would be the political scene of the Pakistan, especially in the conditions when Benazir is coming on 18th of October? I also read the news that the government has officially offered Mr. Nawaz Sharif to come back home once the elections will take place. What do you think?
So do you think what will be the effect on the Pakistani politics? You see, if you're confused about it, don't worry, because everyone is confused as to what is happening in Pakistan. You see, the principal reason why Nawaz was thrown out, Nawaz was actually conveyed this message by Saad Hariri, the son of the Rafiq Hariri, who visited him in London, and also by the Saudis, that you should not go at this time. Musharraf wants you, that if you have to come, you should actually come after the presidential elections. Because what they feared was, you see, Musharraf has to get elected from an electoral college. The electoral college consists of the National Assembly, the Senate, and the 4 provincial assemblies. Now, if Nawaz would have landed there, the electoral college, the many people in the electoral college might have switched their loyalties, making it more and more difficult for Musharraf to do his horse trading inside the electoral college to get re-elected. Now, if Nawaz is allowed after the presidential election, it will probably create more balance in the Pakistani politics, where because if Bhutto is returning on 18th October and is ostensibly arrested, in some cases are prepared, she'll be quickly bailed out. Obviously, she will create an impact for the Pakistan People's Party. So if Nawaz also comes back, there will actually be a sort of balance between them. There is also a move inside the establishment as of now, somehow or the other, to deny Bhutto her third prime ministership. I think they're still thinking in the terms that Bhutto can be a Sonia Gandhi, right? Because as I said earlier, that as we believe in the West is that Musharraf is dependent on Bhutto. Bhutto is also much dependent on Musharraf, right? And they will be much more happier of People's Party becoming a major ruling party or something, minus Benazir Bhutto. Otherwise, both of them come into the power politics.
But may I ask a question? Do you think that Benazir could possibly accept that, given how much she also distrusts some of her leading supporters?
Obviously she would not. This is what the tussle is. This is what the tussle is at the end of the day, what will come. But there's definitely a section inside the Pakistani establishment that thinks, because of various reasons, also the kind of cases, look at the profile, look at the hostility of Pakistan's print and electronic media to the suggestion of the withdrawal of those cases, the Spanish case especially for the oil for food program.
There's one here.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I just got
Very quickly, go on.
Yes, the very quick point is, do you think that the Supreme Court really is in a position to give any strict or maybe negative sort of a judgment, especially in the case when I think Justice Javed Hashmi this morning said that the political parties themselves have supported Musharraf?
No one can actually, $1 million question. I'll actually be investing in Pakistani stock market if I know what Supreme Court is actually going to do on Friday or on the Monday. But the kind of noise, the kind of comments which the justices have produced inside the Supreme Court, it looks like as if at least either they're pretending or they are not going to award a judgment which is going to be extremely difficult for Musharraf. So they'll probably come up on some sort of judgment that will give Musharraf some sort of technical loophole to continue onwards. Because if they confront him openly, Musharraf is actually simply gone. I mean, he's finished. If they come up with a verdict that makes it impossible for him to move forward, he's finished.
Carolyn.
Carolyn Heyman, I'm not representing anyone. We're very, very focused on the next month, but I wanted to ask a different question, Billy, which is, how much does all of this matter, in the sense that in 5 years' time, how different will Pakistan be? What's the range of possibilities, possible Pakistans, depending on who wins the election, if there is an election?
It's a very good closing question. I think we should move towards a close. Perhaps the three of you, I suppose that the first part of that might be, will Musharraf still be a general by the end of this year and still be president? But then, the big picture, what does Pakistan look like? Are you optimistic?
Yeah, well, I think that's a really excellent question. It's something that I try to bring up again and again, though over an even longer timescale. I mean, in the end, if Pakistan's going to... There are two questions. The first is, can Pakistan break out of this endless, circular syndrome, of government failure, lack of development? I mean, and there one does have to say one thing, for the Musharraf and Shawkat government in recent years. Now, admittedly, with a lot of American help, but there has been economic development, albeit very unequal. It's only economic and social development which can break that. It's not politics. The existing Pakistani political classes have proved again and again that they cannot transform the country. It depends on fundamental changes in society and the economy. That's one. Will it go on happening? I don't know. I mean, I was talking to a bunch of leading Western investors recently, and I sort of suggested to them that I was talking about a completely different subject, but I suggested to them, they might need some advice on Pakistan, and they said, frankly, we don't actually have very major plans for investment in Pakistan. Fortunately, people in the Gulf do, but I mean, clearly the whole atmosphere concerning investment is very fragile and will remain so. The second question, which is much longer term, which nobody is talking about, is the environment. I mean, frankly, 50, 100 years from now, no matter a damn what Pakistani government is in power, if there's no water, that is the existential question facing this society. Whether it can survive some of the even middling pessimistic versions of the effects of global warming. At present, it can't. It could develop in the years to come in ways that would help it survive that. But once again, this is not something which is, going to be affected fundamentally by decisions of the Pakistani Supreme Court.
It's a sobering thought, a country with 5 rivers, where a whole state is named Punjab, 5 rivers, but suddenly you run out of water. Moeed, 5 years' time.
Okay, first the quick scenario. I think in the immediate scenario, Musharraf will probably be able to manage as a president. He will manage it, with Bhutto and Nawaz both emerging as powerful political forces in Pakistan. Maybe Bhutto's party comes into power under Musharraf. This arrangement will probably not be very long-lasting and sustainable. There will be a lot of challenges. These political forces do not have natural affinity for each other. So probably this whole system would not really last for more than 12 months or 20 months. So there's a serious challenge there. In 5 years' time, what will actually depend, as Anatol correctly pointed out, is how the economy, how the Pakistani economics actually functions. One of the biggest factors that has moved the Pakistan forward in the last 6 months, as we have seen all this movement of lawyers, is essentially dependent upon the expansion of electronic and print media, right? There's something like 4 24-hour news network in Pakistan, one of them English, Dawn News. And there's something like 36 television channels inside Pakistan and some of them out. So something like 40 Pakistani television channels. Pakistan is the only Muslim country worldwide which has such a large expansion of electronic media at the moment. Compared to Malaysia or Indonesia or even Turkey, nowhere you find such a powerful free electronic media. So much depends upon how the economy actually functions. And economy, the civil society's movement, the NGO things, the flux of the movement, the stock market, it will all depend upon the economy. If the economy performs, you'll see Pakistan moving much better in solving the issues. If the economy fails, it wouldn't. And the economy doesn't like instability. That is one of the reasons the Pakistani establishment wants stability. When Nawaz was deciding to go back to Pakistan, the stock market fell by 6%. When he was deported back to Saudi Arabia, the market went up by 6%, right? So the market doesn't like, and as you know, the business doesn't like instability and uncertainty. So this is my take on it.
Farzana, 5 years' time, optimistic?
Well, certainly as far as my view concerning General Musharraf's immediate prospects are concerned, within the next 5 years, no, I don't actually see him in place. My fear is that Pakistan will experience a series of violent convulsions. However, Pakistan is no stranger to violent convulsions, and it has always bounced back. In this case, I think there are compelling reasons for it to bounce back, not least, of course, Western interests. Western interests that center on the Islamist threat, about which we have talked about this evening, but also Western threats about the security of Pakistan's nuclear assets. And I think those two issues alone will ensure that Pakistan does not become what most of us like to describe as a failed state. I think we will still see this country bumbling along in much the abysmal way it has done since its inception in 1947.
Well, thank you very much. No, I think we'll continue over a drink. Professor Anatol Levin from King's College, Professor of Head of International Relations, Chair of International Relations, King's College. Thank you very much indeed. Moeed Pirzada, writer and broadcaster. Dr. Farzana Sheikh from Chatham House, who has a book coming out shortly, which would be very appropriate for an evening like this. The title is Making Sense of Pakistan. Thank you very much indeed.